Welcome in, welcome back. We're the Real Selection Committee. I'm Mike, this is Greg, and we're in spring training, spring practice. Games are starting to go in, and we're still waiting on that countdown till the season begins. We want to just pick out a few teams that we want to talk about, and so we're looking at Georgia right now. Georgia, didn't have the season that we thought, but that's due to that crazy schedule that they got going on. What a tough schedule in the SEC. There's no easy games in there.
No. Well, they lost Carson Beck right before or during the SEC championship game, before the playoffs, which might have played a little role in them losing in the playoffs. However, I thought Notre Dame was going to beat them either way. But that, let's in being real, that hurt them some. And Georgia had a tough schedule. We think the toughest schedule of any team last year. And within that tough schedule, they seemed like they couldn't play a full game in anything. I remember them struggling with Mississippi State, and Mississippi State was awful. Mm-hmm. So, they had an up and down year, even though they were one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, I mean, that's our first question we want to talk about is that schedule. Let's talk about last year's schedule. They started the season out, they smacked Clemson around, which looked good, and played Alabama at Alabama. Alabama took that huge lead. Yeah. They clawed back in it, but Alabama ended up winning that game. And then they went to Texas. They beat Texas, which was another big win. And then they went to Ole Miss and lost. So they had 2 losses in 9 games of the season. So they were dropping down in this top 25. And it was looking pretty rough for them to claw back into getting into this 12-team playoff system. And then the last game of the season, they had Georgia Tech, and they had to go 6 overtime games to win that game. Because I thought if they lost that game, they were not going to make it into the playoffs.
Yeah, if they'd have lost that game, they would have not made it into the playoffs. And one other game you forgot to mention was how Georgia, while they were looking sputtering out of control, played Tennessee and beat Tennessee pretty good. So, that it goes to show, like you say, if they'd have played a full game against Alabama, they might have won that game. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and then the Ole Miss game, that was kind of a shocker because Ole Miss was kind of up and down like a roller coaster. But that's what happens when you play rough schedules, and the SEC, top to bottom, is still one of the toughest, if not the toughest conference to play in. So it is what it is. That game against Georgia Tech, wow. How much different that could have looked, but
Yeah. So talking about their big games, big wins last year were Clemson and Texas and Tennessee, and then the losses. But let's dive into this year. So it's another brutal schedule that they have going on. They got they played Tennessee at Tennessee. They got Alabama at home. They got Ole Miss at home. They got Texas. They go to Texas, they play Texas at home. So it's another brutal schedule that they got coming up. They got Florida, I think, in a neutral site that they play them. So, this is another tough schedule that their margin of error is very slim here of, losing games and making it in.
Well, I think of all those teams you mentioned, Georgia's going to be the underdog to all of them except maybe Florida. Mm-hmm. And as we get into studying Florida, we may think they're the underdog there by experience.
Yeah.
But the one thing about Georgia, they're a little bit like an Ohio State or the Bama when Nick Saban had them. They don't rebuild, they reload. So, when we get into this discussing what we see as far as their projected starters, experience, you got to keep in mind, this is Georgia. This isn't Charlotte.
Right, so, yeah, this was the first burning question was their schedule, and so it's tough as always. It's Georgia, like you said. They always reload. They don't rebuild. They reload. So let's move on to kind of my second question is let's talk about the impact on recruiting here. They got another great class coming in. I think they're either 2 to 3 ranking recruiting class. They got 5 5-stars, and they got 16
They're
4
littered with
stars.
4 stars.
Yes.
And all over the field.
So you dove in a little bit more and you kind of broke down and you gave them rankings. So I'm going to let you go on and talk about this here.
Well, when we look at Georgia, okay, I have a ranking system for the players. And a 10 is obviously an All-American first team. And you go all the way down to where 5 ranks as a returning starter class. So anything in between 5 and 10 is better than a 1-year starter, which is pretty darn good in and of itself. 4.5 would be a guy who has seen playing time, but hasn't exactly been a starter for the year. And 3 is kind of the worst that I put a grade on anybody because, like I said last week, I don't want to demean any of these players like they're garbage because they're at an FBS team. And if you're at Georgia, there's no garbage on Georgia.
No.
But as you said, their recruiting class comes in at number 2. They have 27 total commits, and as you said, there's like 20 of them are 3 5-star and 16 or 17 4-stars. That is crazy good. So the guys that they don't have starting, there's help on the way. So that adds a lot of depth. Now, do you want to get into the starters yet, or?
Yeah, I would go over, your projections, and then we'll talk about, dive a little more name-wise as far as their rank stars and everything else.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let you talk about what all the research that you've accumulated here and talk about this
What
team.
we see is the quarterback, which is the only person I'm putting a name on in this part, is Gunnar Stockton appears to be that. Now, he's a 4.5 for the simple fact that he has not started for a season. Because they've had Carson back there during his tenure. Now, Gunnar Stockton did play in that SEC championship game and helped Georgia beat Texas. That's a pretty tough game to come in
game.
circumstances, right?
Right.
And then he played Notre Dame in the playoffs. Nothing he did cost them that game.
Right.
So I'm going to say that, that 4.5 is pretty good grade for him because that's just below a season-long starter based on the 2 games we watched him. This kid has talent. The running back's a 4.5, which is the same basic thing. He played probably 6-7 games, started 6 or 7 games in 2024. The wide receiving core is pretty strong. 6.5 and 2 6s. So they're all 2-year starters. That's a strength right there. Their offensive line is where the hiccup can come in because they only have one guy that grades above a 1-year starter, and he's the only guy on the line that was a 1-year starter or better. He was a 2-year starter, and the rest of them were rotational players at best. Very weak by experience. But here again, we are talking Georgia, so that can change as the year goes along. The tight end's a 6. So that's your offense. Now, obviously, there's 11 positions. If 5 is a returning starter, 55 would be what you'd have if you had all returning starters. They come in at a 56, so just above that, even though a lot of them weren't starters. Now, defensive-wise, the defensive line has 1 returning starter. The linebackers have 2 returning starters, 1 guy that nearly was a returning starter, so that's not a bad thing there. Their defensive backfield's a little shaky. They've got 1 guy that was an SEC third team. Their right cornerback was an SEC third teamer, 2-year starter, and they have another, the free safety was a returning starter. The other guys are guys that are going to be making their first turn at being starters. So the defense came in at a 55.5. Not terrible, but not Georgia standards like we would think. Now, they have decent depth all over the place. They got a 4-star recruit coming in at quarterback. They have 1 reserve player at wide receiver and 3 4-star recruits for wide receiver. So a lot of depth at wide receiver, and that's a strength to begin with. The offensive line, they have 1 5-star tackle, 1 4-star tackle coming in. And they have 1 4-star interior offensive lineman coming in, so there is some help there. The tight end, somehow they got 2 4-star recruits coming in. So very strong at tight end. Defensive line, 2 5-star recruits and 2 4-star recruits coming in. We were talking about a good recruiting class, huh?
Yeah.
Now they're linebackers, 1 5-star recruit, 1 4-star recruit. So defensive backfield, there is a lot of depth there, even though it's not the strongest to begin with. So there'll be some positional battles with them. But they have 3 4-star recruits, 2 3 4-star safeties, 2 4-star cornerbacks, plus they have 2 reserve safeties and 1 reserve cornerback. So lots of depth at that position. They're all that's going to be a heck of a battle that will be played out over the spring game and down the road. There'll probably be some transfers out of that defensive backfield. That's what I see with Georgia. I mean, it is Georgia. So even though we say that the experience level's down, they're all good players.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I will say this. I don't think they grade as well as the Ole Miss and the South Carolina that we said would be hard-pressed to get into the playoffs. So there's that.
Yeah. So let's add a few names to your recruiting classes. Elijah Griffin is their top prospect. He's their 5-star guy. He's a defensive line player. Isaiah Gibson is their edge. He's a 5-star.
Yep.
And then they got an offensive lineman, Juan Gaston, who's a 5-star offensive tackle coming in. Yep. And they got Zayden Walker, who's a 5-star linebacker. So, Kirby Smart is great at getting players to come into Georgia.
Sure.
Let's talk about the transfers, okay? Transfers is they got 2 kids from USC, Zachariah Branch and Zion Branch. Zachariah Branch is, from what I'm hearing, at spring practice has been looking great. He's going to be their Z receiver, which is like a slot or whatever kind of receiver. I guess he's just tearing it up in the spring practices. He's going to be alongside their X receiver is looking like Dylan Bell, who's another guy who was there last year. So this team, without a doubt, has talent all the way through. Now let's go to the quarterback position that you talked about, Gunnar Stockton. He looks like he's going to be the starter as the season goes on or starts. Yeah. Then they got Ryan Puglisi, who is the backup, who came in, who very talented kid, great arm streak, can run, can move the pocket a little bit. So Georgia is shaping up to look very good and contend in the SEC. I know you put a lot of work into coming up with these rankings on these guys here. So, excellent job there. Now, let's go with the our last question here. Can Georgia reclaim the SEC title again and contend for the national title? How do you feel about that here?
I don't think they can.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of unprovenness. Now, can they be a dark horse? Absolutely. But I feel by what I see, I just don't think they have the team to do it. Gunnar, and a lot will depend on how Gunnar Stockton comes along. That experience he picked up in the SEC championship game in the playoffs will be monumental for him. But will he will he keep progressing? But as I see it now, I don't. They got a pretty rough schedule. They play a lot of the teams that they're going to have to beat to get there in the regular season. I just don't think they're going to do it. Because like I say, I think they're an underdog to 4 of the 5 teams that you mentioned.
Yeah. To me, the start of the season is the biggest thing to me because within the first 5 games, they got Tennessee and Alabama. If they start out slow, it's only going to get a higher mountain to climb to get in because later down their schedule, they got Ole Miss, they got Florida, they got Texas, they got Georgia Tech, who we all know that stubbed their toe in that game.
And they're going to be a decent football team, too. As you know, I've done the ACC. Mm-hmm. Georgia Tech's not going to be a bad team. They're going to be that same thorn in everybody's side they always are. So
they could probably ill afford to be a 9-3 team and make it into the playoffs with that schedule. That's a pretty brutal schedule,
Yeah.
The one thing here that I find is that they probably now have the best coach in college football with Kirby Smart leading this team. So he's stability of this team, right? But he's out there talking about in these spring practices, ranting and raving about how this team has a lot to work on. They got a lot to prove. They still have a lot to do.
Coach, how was the first week of practice and what were your initial takeaways?
Long way from good. We are a work in progress.
You know, the question to me, another one, he was on there complaining about the nil and the transfers. And, like, it's kind of funny coming from
SEC.
Kirby Smart, SEC, which 6 of the 10 teams in the SEC were the most paid nil contracts out there for these kids to come play. You know, the rumor is that Georgia has an offer out there to Jeremiah Smith. I mean, come on. We all know these SEC teams are out there, you know, greasing the pockets of some of these kids to get them in there.
They don't like it because now that the playing field is even, they look even.
Right.
Okay? So Kirby Smart's a good coach. Saying that they have a lot to prove, he's right. I just showed you that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
He's 100% right. Now, they got talent. Mm-hmm. You'd have to be a fool to say, oh, boy, he's a 4.5. Well, he's a 4.5 at Georgia. He's there for a reason. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Georgia could easily win a lot of games, but I think they're going to struggle.
But my question is, do you see them making it into the playoffs?
No.
You see
No,
them?
I don't. I see them. The only way they make it into the playoffs is if the SEC finishes like last year with all those 9-3 teams. The Big Ten goes backwards. I'll tell you right now, the Big 12 is going to make it hard because I think they're getting their 2 in. Mm-hmm. And the ACC, we'll see what happens there. Mm-hmm. I think the SEC is going to struggle to get 4 in. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Georgia's going to be in the top 4 down there. Now, I still have to do the SEC, but I've done Alabama, I've done Ole Miss, and I've done South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I think Tennessee is going to grade above them. We're pretty close with them. Mm-hmm. Florida, we know, was much better. They were much better last year anyway. Yeah. No one counted anything out of them. You just never know in that SEC. Mm-hmm. And Georgia, to me, was heading the wrong way. We'll see if they can stop that slide down the hill or not.
So right now, it's looking like they're not going to make it in for you. For me, there's a lot of questions at quarterback going around in the SEC. Mm-hmm. You know, the 3 big dogs in this. You know, you got Georgia's got an unknown quarterback. You're going to have Alabama losing Milroe. Yep. They got an unknown quarterback coming in. Ole Miss lost Jackson Dart. There's another guy that's unknown who's going to step up there for Ole Miss. The only stability quarterback play is Tennessee's quarterback. Florida, DJ Lagway, who looked like an outstanding quarterback last year. A lot of praise coming into this year. So the SEC, I think, is just like last year we talked about them picking each other off. Can Georgia sustain and get a few wins in this mix there? No. I think that they're a bubble team that's right on the threshold of making it in, but I want to say that they're going to get in there.
Well, by no means am I going to say I'd put my house payment on that they won't. I don't see it happening. I see them being, you know, closer to a 7-win team, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Georgia, SEC, I can't wait for the season to begin, and it's going to be fun watching how the SEC takes each other out and to see how this committee is going to pick this team here. But it was a lot of fun, a lot of work we did here studying these teams here. But this is going to be it for this episode. We're going to come to you with another team here, but hey, it's really easy to like and subscribe. Please let us know. If you watch this, please watch to the end. And definitely, you know, it's really easy to hit like and subscribe. I mean, come on. We do a lot of work here. We love presenting it to you. It's all about having fun and enjoying this game. We love college football. So until next time, peace.